In Vietnam, the Australian SAS created a weapon so brutal that the U.S. Army wanted it banned. They called it the Bitch, a field-modified battle rifle that violated every safety regulation but saved lives when official doctrine failed. This wasn't just another war story. This was about Allied soldiers taking standard-issue rifles, chopping the barrels, converting them to full auto, and creating shoulder-fired monsters that could dump 30 rounds of 7.62mm NATO in 3 seconds. American troops who heard it firing thought heavy machine guns or cannons had opened up. The sound was that terrifying, but U.S. command saw something different. An illegal, uncontrollable weapon that represented everything wrong with field modifications. The clash wasn't just about firepower, it was about two different philosophies of survival in the jungle, documented in SASR after-action reports and U.S. ordnance investigations that reveal the real story behind Allied weapons policy. If you carried a rifle in combat, you know that gap between what headquarters approves and what keeps you breathing. This breakdown covers that gap. If you value unvarnished military truth, subscribe. Check the description for full sourcing. The Australian Special Air Service Regiment arrived in Vietnam carrying standard-issue L1A1 self-loading rifles, the Commonwealth version of the famous FN/FAL battle rifle. On paper, these weapons were everything a professional soldier could want. Reliable, accurate, and firing the hard-hitting 7.62mm NATO cartridge that could punch through jungle vegetation and drop an enemy with authority. The L1A1 weighed just over 9 pounds loaded, stretched 45 inches from butt to muzzle, and fed from 20-round magazines. It was designed for controlled, semi-automatic fire out to 300 meters, the kind of disciplined marksmanship that had won wars across 2 continents. The Australian Army had adopted it with confidence, knowing their soldiers could put accurate fire downrange when it mattered most. But the jungles of Phuoc Toi province didn't care about official specifications or parade ground doctrine. SASR reconnaissance patrols found themselves operating in terrain where contact meant sudden, brutal firefights at ranges measured in meters, not hundreds of yards. Dense vegetation turned long-range accuracy into a liability when you needed instant firepower to blast through an ambush and escape before superior numbers could pin you down. The standard L1A1, for all its battlefield pedigree, was too long for helicopter insertions, too slow to bring into action in thick scrub, and too limited in its semi-automatic rate of fire when 4-man patrols faced platoon-sized enemy forces. The solution came from the same pragmatic Australian spirit that had improvised weapons in the Western Desert and Pacific campaigns. SASR armorers began converting L1A1 rifles using parts from the L2A1 automatic rifle, the squad support weapon variant that featured full automatic capability, a heavier barrel, and 30-round magazines. They stripped away the handguards, chopped the barrels to manageable lengths, and installed the L2A1's automatic fire control group. Some weapons received forward pistol grips for better control. Others were fitted with 40mm grenade launchers underneath the shortened barrel. The result was a weapon that bore little resemblance to the original battle rifle, except for the basic receiver and action. Australian soldiers christened these field modifications with names that reflected both affection and healthy respect for their destructive potential. The Bitch was the most common nickname, though the Beast and Slaughtermatic also appeared in unit records and personal accounts. The names weren't chosen lightly. These weapons demanded respect from their users and absolute terror from anyone unlucky enough to face them in combat. With cyclic rates between 675 and 750 rounds per minute, a modified L1A1 could empty its 30-round magazine in less than 3 seconds of sustained fire, turning a single soldier into the equivalent of a light machine gun position. The transformation wasn't just mechanical, it was psychological. Veterans described firing the Bitch as barely controlled chaos, a savage recoil that twisted the weapon in their hands while muzzle flash lit up the jungle like a strobe light. The sound was unlike anything in the standard infantry arsenal, a deep, hammering roar that U.S. troops initially mistook for .50 caliber machine guns or even automatic cannons. One SASR veteran recalled that the weapon was almost uncontrollable on full auto, a fireball shooter that spat a wall of flame and noise, but perfect for blasting a hole through a close ambush so a patrol could peel away. This was exactly what made American military leadership deeply uncomfortable. U.S. doctrine emphasized standardization, predictable performance characteristics, and weapons that could be easily integrated into formal tactical systems. The idea of soldiers taking standard-issue rifles and converting them into what amounted to personal machine guns violated every principle of ordnance control and safety regulation. American advisors who witnessed the bitch in action described it as a barbarian weapon, unsafe, illegal, and impossible to incorporate into range cards or fire support coordination measures. Even as they admitted its terrifying effectiveness in close-quarters combat, they saw it as fundamentally incompatible with modern military professionalism. The doctrinal clash ran deeper than simple disagreement over weapon modifications. American military culture, shaped by industrial-scale warfare and complex logistics systems, demanded that every piece of equipment fit into predetermined categories with known performance parameters. Weapons were supposed to be interchangeable parts in a larger military machine, each one performing its designated role within established tactical frameworks. The Australian approach, born from smaller armies operating in austere conditions, prioritized adaptability and individual soldier initiative over systematic uniformity. If the mission required a shoulder-fired light machine gun and official channels couldn't provide one, then field armorers would build one using available parts and battlefield ingenuity. The weight of carrying the bitch extended beyond its physical mass. The soldier assigned to the weapon became the patrol's primary break contact asset, responsible for laying down the initial burst of suppressive fire that would allow his teammates to begin their withdrawal drill. This meant carrying extra ammunition, accepting the weapon's punishing recoil, and knowing that his performance in the first seconds of an ambush could determine whether the entire patrol made it home. Unlike crew-served weapons with designated assistant gunners and ammunition bearers, the bitch was a one-man system that concentrated enormous responsibility on a single soldier's shoulders. The ammunition burden alone represented a significant tactical consideration. Each 7.62mm cartridge weighed considerably more than the 5.56mm rounds that American forces increasingly relied upon, meaning that soldiers carrying modified L1A1s faced a constant trade-off between firepower and mobility. Standard SASR patrol loads included a mix of 20 and 30-round magazines, fragmentation grenades, M79 grenade launcher rounds, radio batteries, and enough rations for extended operations behind enemy lines. Every ounce mattered when patrols moved through mountainous terrain or dense jungle, yet the psychological security of carrying the bitch often outweighed purely mathematical load calculations. The Australian L1A1 self-loading rifle that formed the basis for the bitch represented the culmination of decades of Commonwealth small arms development, yet its very strengths highlighted the tactical compromises that SASR operators faced in Vietnam's unforgiving environment. Weighing 4.3 kilograms empty and stretching 1,143 millimeters from stock to muzzle, the L1A1 was built for conventional warfare where disciplined marksmen engage targets at medium to long range. Its gas-operated tilting breech block action had proven reliable across diverse climates and conditions, earning the respect of soldiers from the Malayan Emergency to the Borneo confrontation. The 20-round detachable box magazine provided adequate firepower for semi-automatic engagement, while the rifle's inherent accuracy made it a favorite among Australian infantry who valued its ability to reach out and touch enemy positions at distances where lighter calibers might falter. The L2A1 automatic rifle, designed as the squad support weapon variant, addressed some limitations of the basic L1A1 while introducing new complications for small unit operations. With its heavier barrel, bipod mounting system, and 30-round magazine capacity, the L2A1 could sustain rates of fire between 675 and 750 rounds per minute, providing fire teams with organic automatic weapons capability that didn't require the bulk and complexity of dedicated machine guns. Yet for SASR reconnaissance patrols operating with 4 to 6 men deep in enemy territory, the L2A1's additional weight and length made it poorly suited to the rapid movement and helicopter insertion techniques that characterized special operations missions. The weapon's role as a crew-served system, ideally operated with an assistant gunner and ammunition bearer, conflicted with the personnel constraints of long-range patrol units that needed every man to carry specialized equipment and supplies. These tactical realities drove SASR armorers to begin their field modifications, creating weapons that combined the L2A1's automatic fire capability with dimensions more appropriate for close-quarters combat. The conversion process required considerable skill and access to spare parts, as armorers had to carefully install the L2A1's full automatic fire control group into L1A1 receivers while ensuring proper headspace and timing. Barrels were shortened using precision cutting tools, with lengths varying according to unit preferences and available equipment. Some weapons retained barrels of 18 to 20 inches, preserving much of their ballistic performance, while others were chopped down to 14 inches or less, prioritizing maneuverability over velocity. The removal of wooden handguards and installation of forward pistol grips allowed better control during automatic fire, though nothing could completely tame the weapon's savage recoil characteristics. The M60 machine gun, officially designated as the general-purpose machine gun for both American and Australian forces, represented the conventional solution to squad-level automatic weapons requirements, yet its characteristics highlighted exactly why SASR operators chose to build their own alternative. Weighing 10.5 kilograms for the basic weapon plus ammunition belts and spare barrels, the M60 provided devastating firepower with its 7.62 cm NATO chambering and sustained rates of fire between 550 and 650 rounds per minute. Its effective range stretched to 1,100 meters when mounted on a tripod, making it ideal for defensive positions and fire support missions. However, the weapon's bulk and complexity made it poorly suited to the rapid movement and stealth requirements of reconnaissance operations, where every pound of equipment had to justify its weight through multiple mission phases. Veteran accounts describe the physical burden of carrying the M60 through Vietnam's demanding terrain, where single operators often found themselves responsible for 23 pounds of steel plus hundreds of rounds of linked ammunition. The weapon's mechanical complexity, while generally reliable, required constant maintenance and cleaning to prevent the stoppages that could prove fatal during sustained engagements. Assistant gunners carried spare barrels, cleaning equipment, and additional ammunition, but SASR patrols rarely had the personnel luxury of dedicating multiple soldiers to supporting a single weapon system. The M60's psychological impact was undeniable, both on friendly forces who took comfort in its presence and enemy troops who learned to fear its distinctive sound signature, yet its tactical employment demanded resources that small reconnaissance units couldn't spare without compromising other mission requirements. The ammunition burden calculation became a critical factor in patrol planning, as the weight difference between 7.62 mm and 5.56 mm cartridges directly affected how much firepower each soldier could realistically carry during extended operations. A standard 7.62 mm NATO cartridge weighed approximately 25 grams, compared to roughly 12 grams for 5.56 mm ammunition, meaning that a soldier carrying 200 rounds of rifle ammunition faced a 5-kilogram weight penalty by choosing the larger caliber. This calculation became even more complex when factoring in the mixed ammunition loads typical of SASR patrols, which included standard ball ammunition, tracer rounds for target designation, and armor-piercing cartridges for engaging hardened positions or vehicles. The 30-round magazines used with modified L1A1s weighed nearly 1 kilogram when fully loaded, compared to 20-round magazines that weighed approximately 650 grams, forcing operators to balance immediate firepower against overall mobility. SASR patrol loads reflected these competing priorities, with typical configurations including a mix of weapons optimized for different engagement scenarios. A 4-man patrol might carry 2 standard L1A1 rifles for precision shooting, 1 bitch for break contact situations, and 1 M79 grenade launcher for indirect fire support, plus individual loads of fragmentation grenades, smoke grenades, and claymore mines for perimeter defense. Radio equipment, medical supplies, rations for multiple days, and specialized reconnaissance gear added to the burden, creating total individual loads that often exceeded 40 kilograms before accounting for personal equipment and ammunition. Veterans describe feeling every ounce during long movements through mountainous terrain or dense jungle, where the physical demands of carrying heavy loads combined with the mental stress of operating in enemy territory to create exhaustion that could prove tactically decisive. The weight penalties associated with 7.62 mm ammunition forced SASR operators to make careful calculations about magazine loadouts and ammunition distribution among patrol members. Unlike conventional infantry, who might carry standardized ammunition loads, reconnaissance patrols had to balance the need for immediate firepower during break contact drills against the requirement for sustained operations over multiple days. The operator carrying the bitch typically received priority for 30-round magazines and extra ammunition, while riflemen might carry additional grenades or specialized equipment instead of maximum rifle ammunition loads. These decisions reflected hard-earned tactical lessons about the nature of contact in Vietnam's operational environment, where engagements typically lasted minutes rather than hours, and where the ability to disengage rapidly often mattered more than sustained firepower. The tactical employment of the bitch in SASR break contact drills represented a radical departure from conventional small unit tactics, exploiting the weapon's psychological impact as much as its raw firepower to achieve effects far beyond what its specifications might suggest. Standard NATO doctrine emphasized controlled, disciplined fire with designated sectors of responsibility and carefully coordinated suppressive patterns, approaches that worked well for conventional infantry operating with platoon or company-level support. However, SASR patrols operating with 4 to 6 men in enemy-controlled territory needed tactics that could generate maximum shock effect in the critical first seconds of an engagement, when the difference between successful extraction and catastrophic casualties often came down to split-second timing and overwhelming violence of action. The typical SASR break contact drill placed the bitch with either the point scout or a flanking security element, positioned to deliver immediate suppressive fire along the most likely ambush positions while other patrol members executed their withdrawal sequence. When contact was initiated, the operator carrying the modified L1A1 would immediately dump a full 30-round magazine in the direction of enemy muzzle flashes, creating a wall of 7.62 mm fire that lasted approximately 2 to 3 seconds at the weapon's cyclic rate of 675 to 750 rounds per minute. This wasn't aimed fire in the conventional sense, but rather area suppression designed to force enemy heads down and disrupt their ability to deliver effective return fire during the patrol's most vulnerable moments. The sound and visual signature of the bitch became integral to its tactical effectiveness, creating psychological effects that extended far beyond its actual hit probability or destructive power. Veterans consistently describe the weapon's muzzle blast as resembling artillery or heavy machine gun fire, with a deep, hammering roar that echoed through jungle terrain and convinced enemy forces they were facing much larger units with crew-served weapons. The massive muzzle flash, particularly pronounced due to shortened barrel lengths and high-pressure cartridges, created a strobing effect that further disoriented enemy troops attempting to return accurate fire. U.S. forces operating in adjacent areas often reported hearing what they initially believed to be .50 caliber machine guns or automatic cannons, testament to the weapon's ability to project an acoustic signature completely, disproportionate to its actual size and weight. This psychological warfare aspect proved particularly effective against Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army units, who had learned to gauge the strength of enemy forces by listening to their weapon signatures during initial contact. A standard M16 or even M60 machine gun produced recognizable sound patterns that experienced enemy soldiers could use to estimate unit size and firepower, allowing them to make tactical decisions about whether to press an attack or withdraw. The bitch defied these calculations, sounding like heavy weapons that shouldn't exist at the small unit level and creating uncertainty that often proved tactically decisive during the critical seconds when enemy commanders were deciding whether to pursue contact or allow SASR patrols to disengage. The M79 grenade launcher, officially designated as the 40mm grenade launcher M79, and nicknamed the Thumper by American forces and Wombat gun by Australians, provided complementary firepower that filled the gap between hand grenades and mortar support. Yet its limitations in close-quarters engagements highlighted the tactical niche that the bitch was designed to fill. Weighing 2.7 kilograms empty and firing 46 mm low-velocity grenades, the M79 could deliver high-explosive rounds out to 350 meters against area targets, making it invaluable for engaging bunkers, tree lines, and suspected enemy positions at medium range. However, the weapon's minimum arming distance of approximately 14 to 27 meters, with training safety distances extending to 30 meters or more, created a dangerous gap in close-range capabilities. This minimum arming distance meant that M79 rounds fired at targets closer than the safe distance would not detonate properly, essentially functioning as large, slow-moving projectiles with limited stopping power compared to high-velocity rifle rounds. Grenadiers operating in dense terrain where contact ranges averaged 30 to 50 meters often found themselves carrying a weapon that was effectively useless during the most critical phases of an engagement, forcing them to rely on sidearms or hastily deployed rifles for immediate self-defense. The tactical employment of the bitch addressed this capability gap by providing devastating close-range firepower that complemented the M79's medium-range effectiveness, creating overlapping fields of fire that covered the full spectrum of likely engagement distances in Vietnam's operational environment. The weapon signature recognition problem extended beyond simple acoustic identification to encompass broader issues of command and control during complex engagements involving multiple Allied units operating in close proximity. Standard military doctrine assumed that friendly forces could identify each other's weapons by sound, allowing commanders to track unit positions and coordinate supporting fires without risking fratricidal incidents. The proliferation of modified weapons like the bitch, shortened M60s, and other field-expedient conversions created acoustic signatures that didn't match standard recognition tables, leading to potential identification problems when Australian and American units operated in overlapping areas. U.S. doctrine placed heavy emphasis on standardization and predictable performance characteristics, viewing weapons modifications as threats to command authority and tactical coordination rather than legitimate responses to operational requirements. The institutional preference for centralized control and systematic approaches to small unit tactics conflicted fundamentally with the Australian philosophy of empowering small unit leaders to adapt their equipment and tactics to specific mission requirements. American field reports from Vietnam consistently express concern about barbarian weapons that couldn't be incorporated into standard fire support coordination measures or range cards, viewing such modifications as evidence of tactical indiscipline rather than innovative problem-solving. This doctrinal divide reflected deeper philosophical differences about the relationship between individual initiative and institutional control in military organizations. U.S. forces, shaped by industrial-scale warfare and complex logistics systems, emphasized interchangeable parts and standardized procedures that could scale across large formations and extended campaigns. The Australian approach, developed through smaller-scale conflicts and resource-constrained environments, prioritized tactical effectiveness over administrative convenience, accepting the risks associated with non-standard weapons in exchange for enhanced battlefield performance. The friendly fire risks associated with unconventional weapon signatures became particularly acute during night operations or complex terrain where visual identification was impossible, and acoustic recognition provided the primary means of distinguishing friendly from enemy forces. The bitch sounded nothing like any weapon in standard recognition tables, creating potential scenarios where Allied units might engage each other based on unfamiliar sound signatures. However, SASR units addressed this challenge through careful coordination with adjacent friendly forces, ensuring that supporting units understood the acoustic signatures of modified weapons and could incorporate them into their tactical planning and execution. The Owen submachine gun, Australia's most successful indigenous small arms design, arrived in Vietnam carrying the reputation earned through Pacific campaigns where its reliability in tropical conditions had saved countless lives. Yet by the mid-1960s, this World War II veteran was increasingly viewed as obsolete in a conflict where enemy forces carried modern assault rifles and machine guns. Weighing 4.23 kilograms without its magazine and firing 9x19mm parabellum cartridges at approximately 700 rounds per minute, the Owen had proven its worth in the dense jungles of New Guinea and Bougainville, where its top-mounted magazine and robust construction allowed it to function reliably even when clogged with mud, sand, or vegetation. The weapon's distinctive silhouette, with its magazine protruding vertically from the receiver, had become synonymous with Australian infantry operations across the Pacific theater. However, the tactical environment of Vietnam exposed fundamental limitations that had been acceptable against Japanese forces equipped with bolt-action rifles and light machine guns, but proved increasingly problematic when facing Viet Cong and North Vietnamese army units armed with AK-47 assault rifles and RPD machine guns. The Owen's effective range of approximately 150 meters left Australian soldiers at a significant disadvantage when engaging enemies who could deliver accurate automatic fire out to 300 meters or more. The 9mm cartridge, while adequate for close-quarters combat in the confined spaces of bunker systems or urban environments, lacked the penetrating power needed to engage targets behind substantial cover or at extended ranges through dense vegetation. The F-1 submachine gun, introduced as the Owen's replacement, represented an attempt to modernize Australian small arms while retaining the proven reliability characteristics that had made the Owen successful. Chambered for the same 9.19mm cartridge and featuring a similar blowback operation, the F-1 weighed 3.7 kilograms empty and could sustain rates of fire between 600 and 640 rounds per minute. Its more conventional design, with a side-mounted magazine and simplified manufacturing requirements, promised reduced production costs and improved ergonomics compared to the aging Owen system. Yet the F-1 never achieved the battlefield acceptance of its predecessor, with many soldiers viewing it as a solution to problems that no longer existed rather than an answer to current tactical challenges. Both submachine guns suffered from the fundamental limitation of their cartridge, which simply could not compete with the intermediate cartridges like the 7.62 ounce 39mm used in AK-47s or the 7.62 31mm NATO round fired by Australian SLRs and modified weapons like the Bitch. In firefights where range and penetration determined survival, soldiers armed with 9mm weapons found themselves outgunned and forced to close to dangerous distances to achieve effective hits. The psychological impact of carrying an obviously inferior weapon in terms of range and stopping power created morale problems that extended beyond simple tactical considerations, as troops naturally questioned why they were expected to engage modern assault rifles with what increasingly appeared to be obsolete technology. The contrast between outdated submachine guns and the Bitch represented opposite ends of the spectrum in Australian small arms philosophy during Vietnam operations. Where the Owen and F-1 were underpowered and limited in range, the modified L-1A1 was overpowered and difficult to control, yet combat veterans consistently preferred the challenge of managing excessive firepower over the frustration of carrying inadequate weapons. The creation of the Bitch can be understood partly as a reaction against the institutional tendency to issue weapons based on traditional roles and doctrinal assumptions rather than actual battlefield requirements as experienced by soldiers in contact. The Stoner 63 weapon system represented the American attempt to solve small unit firepower requirements through technological innovation rather than field-expedient modifications. Yet its limited deployment highlighted the gap between experimental excellence and mass production reality that characterized much of the Vietnam War's weapons development story. Designed as a modular system where a single receiver could be configured as an assault rifle, carbine, belt-fed light machine gun, or fixed defensive weapon, the Stoner 63 promised to revolutionize squad-level tactics by providing unprecedented flexibility in a lightweight 5.56 cm package. The system's theoretical advantages were compelling, with the light machine gun configuration weighing only 4.9 to 5.6 kilograms compared to the M60's 10.5 kilograms, while delivering comparable rates of fire between 700 and 900 rounds per minute. However, the Stoner 63's sophisticated design demanded careful maintenance and precise adjustment to function reliably in Vietnam's harsh environment, requirements that proved incompatible with the realities of extended field operations where cleaning supplies were limited and mechanical expertise was often unavailable. Navy SEALs and specialized Army units that received Stoner systems generally praised their performance, but these elite formations had the training, resources, and operational flexibility needed to maintain complex weapons properly. Conventional infantry units, operating under different logistical constraints and with less specialized personnel, found the system's maintenance requirements prohibitive compared to simpler alternatives like the M16 and M60. The total production run of approximately 4,000 Stoner 63 weapons highlighted the disconnect between innovation and implementation that characterized many Vietnam-era weapons programs. While individual units that received the system often reported excellent results, the weapon never achieved the mass deployment necessary to affect tactical doctrine at higher levels or provide standardized training and logistics support across large formations. This limited fielding created a two-tier system where elite units had access to advanced weapons, while conventional forces made do with standard equipment that might not be optimally suited to their specific missions. The institutional resistance to weapons modifications reflected broader concerns about maintaining discipline and control within military organizations operating under extreme stress, yet the regulations prohibiting unauthorized changes to service weapons often conflicted with tactical realities that demanded adaptive solutions to immediate problems. Modern military regulations explicitly forbid unauthorized modifications to issued weapons, emphasizing safety, liability, and standardization concerns that existed in Vietnam-era forces as well, though enforcement was necessarily more flexible under combat conditions. The creation of the bitch and similar field-expedient weapons violated these regulations, creating legal and administrative problems for units that chose tactical effectiveness over regulatory compliance. U.S. military leadership viewed weapons like the bitch as symbols of institutional breakdown rather than examples of innovative problem-solving, reflecting deeper philosophical differences about the proper relationship between individual initiative and organizational authority. The American preference for centralized control and standardized procedures conflicted with battlefield realities that often demanded immediate, locally developed solutions to tactical problems that hadn't been anticipated by higher-level planning staffs. While no specific written order explicitly banned the bitch by name, existing regulations against unauthorized full automatic conversions, barrel modifications, and non-standard attachments would have made similar weapons illegal for U.S. personnel, explaining much of the institutional discomfort with Australian practices. The psychological impact of the bitch extended far beyond its mechanical specifications, creating a weapon that existed as much in the minds of those who heard it as in the hands of those who carried it, transforming the acoustic landscape of Vietnam's battlefields in ways that standard military doctrine had never anticipated or prepared for. When SASR operators opened fire with their modified L1A1 rifles, the sound that emerged bore no resemblance to conventional small arms fire, instead producing a deep, hammering roar that reverberated through jungle terrain with the authority of crew-served weapons or artillery pieces. The shortened barrels and high-pressure 7.62mm cartridges combined to create muzzle blasts that could be heard for miles, accompanied by massive tongues of flame that illuminated entire tree lines and created disorienting strobe effects during night operations. Enemy forces, accustomed to gauging the strength and composition of opposing units through careful analysis of weapon signatures, found their tactical calculations completely disrupted by encounters with the bitch. Experienced Viet Cong and North Vietnamese Army fighters had learned to distinguish between the sharp crack of M16 rifles, the slower hammering of M60 machine guns, and the distinctive reports of various other Allied weapons, using this acoustic intelligence to estimate enemy strength and make informed decisions about whether to press attacks or withdraw. The sound of the bitch defied these calculations, suggesting the presence of heavy weapons that shouldn't exist at the small unit level, and creating uncertainty that often proved tactically decisive during the critical moments when enemy commanders were deciding whether to continue engagement. U.S. forces operating in areas where SASR patrols employed these modified weapons consistently reported hearing what they initially believed to be .50 caliber machine guns, automatic cannons, or even artillery pieces, testament to the weapon's ability to project an acoustic signature completely disproportionate to its actual size and tactical role. Radio intercepts and after-action reports document numerous instances where American units requested immediate fire support or airstrikes in response to what they perceived as enemy heavy weapons positions, only to discover that the sounds originated from friendly Australian patrols conducting break contact drills with their field-modified rifles. This acoustic deception worked in both directions, with enemy forces similarly convinced they faced much larger units equipped with weapons that exceeded the normal firepower available to reconnaissance patrols. The operators who carried the bitch developed complex relationships with their weapons that combined respect, fear, and dependence in ways that conventional military training had never addressed or anticipated. Veterans consistently described the weapon as having personality characteristics that bordered on the malevolent, referring to it not as a tool but as a living entity that demanded constant attention and respect. The savage recoil that could tear the weapon from insufficiently prepared hands, the deafening muzzle blast that caused permanent hearing damage, and the uncontrollable muzzle climb that made accurate fire nearly impossible created a firing experience that was as much physical ordeal as tactical necessity. Yet these same characteristics that made the bitch difficult and dangerous to operate also provided psychological security that conventional weapons couldn't match, creating an emotional bond between operator and weapon that reflected the extreme circumstances under which both functioned. SASR soldiers knew that regardless of ammunition fouling, mechanical wear, or environmental conditions, the bitch would fire when the trigger was pulled, delivering devastating volumes of fire that could break the most determined enemy assault. This reliability came at enormous personal cost, with operators accepting permanent hearing loss, shoulder injuries from repeated recoil trauma, and the constant risk of weapon malfunction or catastrophic failure as acceptable prices for tactical effectiveness. The emotional contrast between U.S. troops struggling with early M16 reliability problems and SASR operators managing the brutal characteristics of the bitch highlighted fundamental differences in how the two Allied forces approached the relationship between soldier and weapon. American soldiers, raised in a military culture that emphasized standardization and systematic solutions to tactical problems, expected their weapons to function predictably within established parameters and became deeply demoralized when early M16 variants failed to meet these expectations. The psychological impact of weapon malfunctions during combat created lasting distrust that extended beyond simple mechanical issues to encompass broader questions about institutional competence and care for soldier welfare. Congressional investigations and official after-action reports documented numerous cases where American soldiers died with jammed rifles, unable to return fire during the critical seconds that determined survival in close-quarters engagements. The image of soldiers found with cleaning rods stuck in their rifle barrels became a powerful symbol of institutional failure that damaged morale and confidence far beyond the immediate tactical implications. These failures created a psychological burden that affected unit cohesion and individual performance, as soldiers questioned whether they could depend on their primary weapons when their lives were at stake. Australian soldiers operating the bitch faced the opposite psychological challenge, carrying weapons that were guaranteed to fire but might be impossible to control effectively once the trigger was pulled. This created a different kind of stress, where operators had to balance their need for immediate firepower against the risk of losing control of their weapons during sustained engagements. The knowledge that a single burst from the bitch could expend an entire magazine in 3 seconds forced operators to develop extraordinary fire discipline, knowing that poor trigger control could leave them defenseless at the moment when continued suppression was most critical. The mental burden of carrying the bitch extended beyond personal considerations to encompass the operator's role as the patrol's primary break contact asset, responsible for providing the initial burst of suppressive fire that would allow his teammates to begin their withdrawal sequence. This responsibility created enormous psychological pressure, as the success or failure of the entire patrol's extraction often depended on the bitch operator's performance during the first seconds of an engagement. Unlike conventional weapon systems where multiple soldiers could provide overlapping fields of fire, The bitch concentrated extraordinary tactical responsibility on a single individual whose weapon handling skills and decision-making under stress could determine whether his entire team survived contact with enemy forces. Veterans describe this responsibility as creating a unique form of combat stress that combined the normal pressures of small unit operations with the additional burden of knowing that their weapon was both salvation and potential catastrophe, capable of saving their patrol's lives or destroying it through operator error or mechanical failure. The psychological impact of this responsibility extended well beyond the immediate tactical situation, affecting post-war relationships with authority, equipment, and institutional trust in ways that reflected the extraordinary circumstances under which these weapons were employed and the life-or-death decisions that their use entailed.